Since the romantic rehabilitation of Lilith from child murderer and nocturnal seducer of men to symbol of feminine power and defiance, Lilith has become easily one of the most recognizable of all contemporary demons. But her origin, first in ancient Mesopotamia and then in early Jewish medieval literature, are marked by curious historical accidents. Curiously enough, Lilith may have emerged as a linguistic mistake in a text meant to actually parody rabbinic legends. Let's explore the historical vicissitudes of She of the Night, of Lilith. Make sure to subscribe here to Esoterica for weekly explorations of topics in esoteric history. And if you'd like to support this work, providing evidence-backed, free, and accessible content like this episode, I'd hope you consider checking out my Patreon or picking up some of the cool merch here that we have on the channel. Also, if you're new to the study of esotericism and you want reliable literature, make sure to check out my study guide. And if you're interested in historical books on topics in the occult and the mystical, check out our bookstore over at Esoterica Rare Books. You can find links to all of those in the description and in the pinned comment below. But now to the origins of Lilith in language, parody, and myth. I'm Dr. Justin Sledge, and welcome to Esoterica, where we explore the arcane in history, philosophy, and religion. This episode is part of an ongoing series I've been doing here on the channel about Lilith. In this episode, I want to dig a bit deeper into a couple of points that I only superficially made previously. These will mostly focus in on the origins of Lilith as a kind of series of interesting historical accidents. The first has to do with how Lilith represents not only a fusion of several different ancient Mesopotamian spirits, demons, and gods, as much as those were ever really distinct, but also a kind of linguistic mishap that gave rise to her name as such. It seems that an etymological mistake between the linguistic isolate Sumerian and the Semitic language Akkadian, those two languages aren't linguistically connected at all, would eventually cause a fusion between the sub-divine beings of the Lilu, or the Lili family, and the daughter of Anu, and thus a goddess herself proper, the goddess Lamashtu. This can be seen in how the Lilu, or the Lily spirits, aren't written with the divine determinative sign, the Dinger sign, like Lamashtu. What seems to have happened is a kind of assimilation, where some of the malevolent activity of the Lily, or the Ardat Lily especially, are fused with the explicitly antenatal evil of Lamashtu, who was known to kill children, either by tapping on their mother's stomach 7 times, murdering babies through crib death, or even just kidnapping the infants from their wet nurse. Lamashtu's infamy is well attested in the Amulet literature, and spells against her which deploy the iconography of the leader of the Wind Lulu, Pazuzu. But, of course, Pazuzu gets a pretty bad rap in contemporary times for possessing Reagan and the Exorcist movies, but that's pretty ironic considering that he was widely invoked precisely as a protector of young children and mothers. So, the Exorcist, you did Pazuzu dirty, and we're not going to forget about it. But Pazuzu aside, what appears to have happened is that some of the characteristics and some of the functions of the Lili or Lilu spirits, including that of Ardat Lili, who I'll come back to in just a minute, seem to have been fused with those explicit antenatal evil of Lamashtu, with a kind of false friend relationship between the etymologically unrelated Sumerian term for these beings, the Lil spirits, and the Semitic Akkadian word for night, Lilum or Liliatum, thus seeming to give rise to a pan-Mesopotamian demoness, later attested in Phoenician, Israelite, Jewish, Persian, Mandean, etc. sources, again, largely responsible for crib death or seducing young men in their sleep, though, again, we'll see that's the result of this fusion which gives rise to Lilith. And we see the result of this process in some of the many god lists which do tell the Sumerian names or spellings of a specific god with their equivalent in the Semitic Akkadian language. Think of Sumerian as kind of the Latin of the Mesopotamian world. Specifically, at the end of some of those lists, there's something like an appendix where various non-god spirits, again, they lack that dingier determinative, and that's where you find versions of this linguistic collapse between the two linguistically unrelated languages of the isolate language Sumerian and the Semitic language Akkadian. Now, exactly how this process developed isn't totally understood, but it's likely that partially through a kind of linguistic mishap and a bit of a divine demonic association and assimilation, Lilith probably came into being as something of a false friend linguistic mistake. However, this process of the solidification of Lilith into a singular demoness that we all know and many of you love wasn't even totally complete during the period of the Incantation Bowl literature, which were produced during the 6th through the 8th centuries of the Common Era. You can check out a whole episode I have on the Incantation Bowls. While some of the iconographic elements seem to have come together by this point, in the form of a voluptuous young woman with scandally loose wild hair, often depicted bound in chains, the features of Lilith as centrally responsible for crib death weren't yet dialed in that literature. In the Incantation Bowl literature, she's most often associated with the nocturnal assault of men. In fact, some of the bowls, the incantation, will take the form of a ritual divorce or a get between the man in question and Lilith. You drive her out by basically divorcing her. In this mode, Lilith is much more akin to the then already ancient spirit of the Ardat Lily, or the phantom bride-to-be. These are said to be the ghosts of young women who die before becoming married, and thus their unfulfilled sexual urges drive them to nocturnally seduce men. So think of something like a Mesopotamian succubus. Though while mostly attested in this literature as female, there actually are mentions of Etel Lily, or phantom bridegrooms as well. And unsurprisingly, not only do we see mentions of Lilith in the feminine singular in the Incantation Bowls, but we find Liliths, Lilith, Liliot, in both the masculine and feminine plural forms. Again, in the Incantation Bowl literature, we do see Lilith in the feminine singular, but also masculine and female Liliths. So again, not yet a Lilith singular yet. That image first emerges in the pseudepigraphic work, the Alphabet of Ben Sira, composed in what is now Iraq, sometime between 700 and 900 of the Common Era, so just after the period of the Incantation Bowls, and it would be there that the myth of Lilith, as we all recognize her, would be formally developed. And in that text, Lilith appears as the first time as the first partner of Adam, made from the same clay as he, and thus equal to him by all rights. Famously, she asserts this equality by insisting on being on top during the act of sexual intercourse, for which Adam refuses. In defiance, Lilith pronounces the ineffable name of God and disappears into the air. There's that air spirit association, wind spirits. Adam, for his part, cries out to God to bring her back, and God, for God's part, sends 3 angels to do just that. These are going to be important in just a minute. The deal would be simple. She can come back, all is forgiven, or she can stay, but 100 of her children must die every day. These 3 angels corner her over the Sea of Reeds, where a pharaonic army would one day be drowned and threaten her again, but defiant, Lilith counteroffers. She'll accept the death of 100 of her brood each day, but she'll be able to stalk the children of human beings for 8 days after a boy's birth and for 20 days after the birth of a girl. However, she'll be forever deterred by those 3 powerful angels, who we'll come back into in a minute, Sinoi, Sansanoi, and Samangalaf, such that if she sees the names of those angels over a child, she'll relent and the child will recover. And in this brief tale, thousands of years of mythological strands are fused together into what has become a truly enduring narrative. Lilith, the defiant first wife of Adam, becomes the murderer of infants in her fury, which can only be repulsed through angel magic. And indeed, it's around the time of the production of the alphabet, or Alphabet of Ben Sira, that the first Aramaic amulets and first Aramaic incantations begin to appear with the now commonplace Adam v'Chava chutz Lilith. Adam and Eve, go away, Lilith. Again, featuring those talismanic angel names, Sinoi, Sansanoi, and Samangalaf, a formula that's still reprinted down to this day in handbooks of Jewish magic, as we'll see. But isolating this story from the larger context of the text can perhaps lead to a bit of a misreading of this very famous and very important Lilith narratives. Specifically, one has to keep in mind that the Alphabet of Ben Sira is a work of parody. Specifically a parody of rabbinical literature, rabbinical law, and just rabbinical wisdom more generally. In fact, it's such a scathing parody filled with bawdy and uncouth tales that one scholar urged that if you find a copy, it should be burned, even if you have to burn it on the Sabbath that falls on a Yom Kippur. So burn it anytime you find it. That's how horrifying this text was in some ways. And to be honest, it is absolutely hilarious of a book if you're acquainted with rabbinical literature. To give you a sense of what to expect from this book, let me just summarize the opening. The prophet Jeremiah went to a bathhouse only to find a bunch of wicked Ephraimites masturbating together. Horrified by this wanton goonery, he tries to flee but is seized by said Ephraimites, and worried that Jeremiah will tattle on them, he promises that he'll keep their secret, but they don't believe him. So they basically threaten to assault him as those in Sodom did, unless he masturbates with them. You can't beat them, join them. Beat them. Cornered by the rapacious Ephraimite Onanus, he spills his seed into the bathwater. Well, sometime later, his daughter visits just that bathhouse and becomes pregnant with her father's seed. And only 7 months later, 7 months, not 9 months, she gives birth to a baby with a full set of teeth and capable of not only speaking, but arguing the finer points of the origin of his name, gematria, and even how he's just like his father Jeremiah. In fact, he even refused to be born until she gave him his name. Then this weird newborn decided to further emulate his father, the prophet Jeremiah, having composed some poems in acrostic forms, that's to say Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey. So the baby does the same. He writes a whole long, hence the name of the text, the Alphabet of Ben Sira. The text goes on to detail letter by letter a series of wisdom, these aphorisms. For instance, Aleph is abstain from worrying in your heart. Al titain dagab livcha, for worrying has killed many giborim, has killed many heroes, mighty men. The teacher then responds with bet, and the child responds, by a beautiful woman's countenance, many have been destroyed, and numerous are all her slain ones. But then we start to learn a bit about this teacher, again, a rabbi character. For instance, after noting that he avoids worrying, just like the first anecdote says, he declares that he doesn't have a worry in the world, except for that his wife is ugly. And as the acrostic goes on, we learn that the teacher has the hots for a widow who lives down in the courtyard. The problem, however, is that she killed her first husband with witchcraft, and would probably do the same to him. Then the text just devolves into an extended sardonic misogynistic screed, mocking the teacher as basically idiotic and lustful, clearly no match for this wunderkind Ben Sira. But the text takes nothing for sacred. It mocks women, it mocks prophets, it especially mocks rabbis and their alleged wisdom. You can see why this text has a reputation in rabbinical Judaism. That's, yes, if you find it, burn it. That's what they argue. It's shocking that it survives at all. And it's in this bit of biting sarcasm that we find that famous Lilith story. The point being that this story certainly isn't meant to be taken seriously or is an authentic myth. And it's probably just being told to mock the kind of tall tales the rabbis made up in literature like the Midrashim, which are replete, in this case, with all kinds of bawdy sexual themes of here Adam refusing his first wife, Lilith, to be on top during sex. Even the names of the angels responsible for dealing with Lilith, Sinoi, Sasinoi, and Semangaloth, may be part of the joke. They don't remotely sound like angel names. And while some strange angel names do exist, Metatron and Sandalphon are standouts in their weirdness, Sinoi, Sansanoi, and Semangaloth don't sound remotely like Hebrew. They lack the typical L theonym, and they just sound kind of like made-up gibberish. Again, perhaps mocking how the rabbis themselves just made up gibberish angel names sometimes. Though, however, some version of these angels' names do show up in a few incantation bowls and thus maybe have had some kind of folk currency. Further, some scholars have also argued that their names are supposed to have a mysterious, whispering, incantation-like quality meant to scare off Lilith. But it may be precisely these folk traditions that the text is mocking. And if you've ever seen depictions of Sinoi, Sansinoi, and Samangaloth in the amulet literature, they don't even look like angels. They look like weird cartoon birds or something. And in some cases, they're just completely abstract objects that I don't even know what they look like. A bush, maybe? I've never heard a satisfying description of what these more abstract versions of them might be, but I wouldn't at all be surprised if they had their origins in the magical practices of pre-Islamic Iraq. Also, it's worth noting that they kind of become converted in the Christian context as well as being various saints that people used to deal with demons over in Egypt, so this may have been a big folk tradition. But this isn't the only such incident in the history of demons and demonology where a parody and mockery ended up being taken extremely seriously in occult practice. Starting in 1577, the 5th edition of De Praestigiis Daemonum on the trickery of demons, a book actually meant to dispel belief in the witch craze, Johannes Weyer began attaching an appendix which he entitled The False Kingdom of the Demons, or Pseudomonarchia Daemonum. This demonological catalog details scores of beings, including demons of the directions, their appearances, their powers, and their feudal retinues. 69 in total, though 72 are actually mentioned. Curiously enough, Lucifer, Beelzebub, and Satan seem to have been dropped from the list, perhaps not to overly scandalize the reader or something. In addition, Weyer provides an abbreviated ritual by which these spirits are said to have been summoned, and he informs the reader that he censored the ritual a bit lest anyone actually try to attempt this, God forbid. Don't try this at home kind of thing. Now, Johannes Weyer was a former student of Cornelius Agrippa of 3 Books of Occult Philosophy fame, and he was one of the best positioned people at the time of having a detailed understanding of necromantic magic that was practiced in the 16th century. But what was his actual position on all this? He held that necromancers' attempts to summon demons represent an evil will on their part, and while demons can be summoned, they can only affect illusions and trickery, thus basically stringing along the idiot necromancer until their eventual damnation results. Again, the demons don't have any power aside from just being able to trick gullible necromancers. So why would Johannes Weyer publish such a demonic list and ritual in the first place? Well, to mock the whole business, the whole sordid business of spirit conjuring. He thought it was evil and idiotic. While Weyer does believe in demons and possession and even demonic summoning, he thinks these catalogs of demons are just silly. And by showing them to the light of printing, their mysterious glamour will evaporate. It's basically an expose. After all, the demons of this text seem something out of a children's fairy tale, and the ritual itself is just dressed up Catholic-ish exorcism, utterly typical of the time. Thus, publishing the list was meant to function as an expose on all that super spooky necromancy of his day, revealing it to be little more than fairy tales and Catholic superstition. He was Protestant after all. But the ironic outcome of all of this was that Weyer's Pseudomonarchia Daemonum, probably in a defective manuscript copy, via its English translation and republication in Reginald Scott's 1584 The Discovery of Witchcraft, would become the foundation for the Goetia in the Lesser Key of Solomon sometime in the mid-17th century. Of course, the Lesser Key of Solomon is generally regarded, and really the Goetia specifically, has gone on to become the book of ritual demonology, especially in English, especially in the contemporary world of occultism, following the experimentation by folks like Mathers and Aleister Crowley. Now, I imagine that this state of affairs must have him face-palming and spinning in his grave. He literally published the text to reveal just how silly all of this demon summoning business was, only to have that very text become the foundation for the most popular book of demonic conjuration in the contemporary occult world. Now, I'm not really sure who the joke's on here, but I just love these little moments with Lilith and the Pseudomonarchia Daemonum, where history zigs where we think it might zag, and the cunning of history reveals that it definitely has a sense of humor. If you're curious about this whole book, The Pseudomonarchia Daemonum, and Johannes Weyer, who's fascinating, he actually argued that many women convicted of witchcraft were just suffering from mental illness. You should check out my episode on him. But to add that list of parody becoming reality, we can probably too add Lilith. Regardless, what was probably meant just as a sardonic parody by the author of Ben Sira became fused with wider Mesopotamian folk belief and Lilith spirits, such that a singular entity, the demonic Lilith, seducer of men and murderer of children, was here to stay. And along with her came a relatively stable collection of amulets, featuring Psenoi, Sansenoi, and Samangalath to ward off from children during these periods of their vulnerability to her predation. And those amulets in various forms will be printed and written all the way down through the wider Jewish world, from Yemen all the way over North Africa and into Europe, where they would appear in the most famous Jewish books of magic. The 17th century Rabbi Moshe Zakutos, the Ramaz, in his famous book Sefer Shoshei HaShemot, and then in the Sefer Razio HaMalach, first printed in Amsterdam in 1701, but very likely having some kind of medieval origins. Indeed, such amulets are still being made down to this day, and you can even go to an Orthodox Jewish bookstore and buy them, or at least buy the books that feature them, and they work just the same. But the history of Lilith is fascinating because it reveals just how such an interesting demonic personality can arise through a series of accidents. Through ancient linguistic foibles, mocking parody taken seriously, and the powerful endurance of folk beliefs all fused together, producing Lilith. More on this in the future. But until next time, I'm Dr. Justin Sledge, and thank you for watching Esoterica, where we explore the arcane in history, philosophy, and religion.